course, we don't know everything about Jerusalem. There's a lot of speculation. Some things are disputed, some things are certain. There is a huge model here of the city of Jerusalem, but before we see that, it may be easier if we get an idea. Here at least I can point to things. First of all, this is the Temple of Jerusalem, which is the summit of Mount Moriah. The Mount of Olives is that way. Then, beginning from the Temple of Jerusalem here, this is the city of David. It's relatively small, but it is naturally divided by the Kiropeion Valley, which runs along this wall here, and then continues to run in this direction. The Kiropeion Valley separates the Mount Moriah from Mount Zion, and this is the summit of Mount Zion. So this is Mount Zion here, this is the Mount Moriah here, and they connect in this area here. That's the first element. The city of Jerusalem originally was this factor here, the city of David, the Ir David. When King David conquered Jerusalem from the Jebusites, what he conquered was exactly here. There is archaeological speculation that there may have been actually two cities because of the dual form of the terminology, other than the theology involved in the dual form of Yerushalayim, but that there might have been a city, a separate city, for example, of Ir U and Ir Salem or Shalem. We do speak of a king of Salem in Genesis in a certain moment, Melchizedek. So that in the framework of this, the speculation is that if there would be a second city, it would be located more or less in this vicinity here, because this area has never actually been archaeologically unearthed. It is covered with housing which has been there for many centuries, and they have not done any digging here. But there is that speculation of the second city, only in the area of speculation. Here in the Ir David, there was the palace of King David. After the palace of King David, there was the city. In the city walls, there was the necropolis. And included in the necropolis, somewhere here, is the tomb of King David and the King Solomon and all of the other kings of Judah. Remembering that there was a divided kingdom, a kingdom of Judah and a kingdom of Israel. In the end, there is the pool of Siloam, not shown here, at the very end of the city. The pool of Siloam was created by King Hezekiah by digging an underground tunnel from the spring of Gihon, and then the water was carried by the tunnel to here, so that people who lived in this neighborhood could gather the water from here, while people who lived in this neighborhood would have the spring of Gihon as the source of their water. King Hezekiah also enclosed the city in its walls, such as it remained until the destruction of Jerusalem in the year 135. That is to say, it was the Temple of Jerusalem here. After the Temple of Jerusalem, the city walls then went in this direction. Here we would have the citadel, the residence of the king, built by King Herod, and including Mount Zion, and including the Ir David. So Ir David, Mount Zion, Mount Moriah, the Temple Mount, and this. This was not Jerusalem. Today, this is Jerusalem. The city walls of Jerusalem now run along the axis of the Temple Mount. So the temple walls, actually, the city walls of Jerusalem are now roughly like this today. And this is outside the walls of Jerusalem today. Whereas this site did not belong to the city of Jerusalem, and it was added to the city of Jerusalem after the year 136, when the Romans rebuilt the city, which they destroyed, and established new city walls, and the city assumed its present parameters. Now, King Herod, because here there is the Kedron Valley on this side, and here there is the valley of Gehenna on this side, and here is the valley has several names, among others the Valley of the Snakes on this side, but here there is no valley on the north side. From a military standpoint, this was dangerous to the city, and so King Herod built the second wall of the city here, and then he built a third wall around the city here, so that an invading army, no, the city begins here. An invading army from the north would first have to conquer the first wall, then they would have to fight for the second wall, they would have to conquer the second wall, then they would have to fight for the area between the second and the first wall, then they would have to conquer the first wall, and finally they would be able to conquer the city. In spite of all of that, the fact is that that's the way the Crusaders took the city, and that's the way the city was then taken back by the Muslims at the end of the 12th century. In other words, the north side was always militarily the weak side of Jerusalem. Over and above that, this is the residence of the king, the citadel. This is the Temple Mount. Here we have the Antonia Fortress, where Jesus was tried by Pontius Pilate on Good Friday, twice. Here we have the sheep folds. Then, of course, other buildings. This was all housing buildings and so forth. The death of Jesus. When they brought Jesus to be crucified, they took him here inside this area, and then out the city wall, roughly in this area, to more or less this area, and this is where Jesus was crucified, outside the city. This was considered the city. So if they crucified him here, he was outside the city. He was not crucified in the city. And he was buried, of course, also outside the city. Among other things, they include here the idea of the Circo, the Roman Circus, and the amphitheater, and so. We know that the Emperor Hadrian made a visit to Jerusalem in the year 119, and at that time he left souvenirs, as emperors would when they would visit different places, and it is recorded in history that he built a circus, that he built a theater like the Colosseum, and that he built the triclinion over the tomb of Jesus, and so. That he built these different structures in Jerusalem. With the triclinion, we know that it is the Holy Sepulchre. With the other structures, it is only speculation. We don't have the actual archaeological discoveries to say that it was exactly here and it was not somewhere else. So it is only speculation, educated speculation, as to the probabilities. Are there any questions about this? No. So now we can go and see it there, as it was first built by King Solomon, then it was rebuilt a second time in the days of Nehemiah, and then, though it continued to be called the Second Temple, it was entirely rebuilt by King Herod the Great in the period between 50 BC and his death, which is roughly what we today call around 7 or 6 BC. And what he did, he enlarged the Temple Mount. He took all the old buildings while they were still standing and built new buildings such that at any given time some of the old was still standing. When the new was already standing, the old would be removed from within. So there was not that. We continue to say it was the Second Temple, even though from a rational standpoint we might say Herod's temple was actually the Third Temple. Be that as it may, the temple, the Antonia Fortress next to the temple, and then here we have this area between the second and the third wall, and different structures. The most significant in this external area would be the pools of the sheep pools, where Jesus cured the paralytic. These were pools of water, 5 great pools of water, and here you see 2, so here already there's a divergence. 5 pools of water which were brought in from very distant locations, even from Bethlehem by aqueduct and so, to the temple, because the temple needed enormous amounts of water. Considering the amount of blood which was being poured out in the temple, that blood constantly had to be washed away, so as not to stay there, so as not to create an unhygienic situation. So in the framework of this, enormous amounts of water were required, and they had the sheep poles, as they are called, and then Jesus cures the paralytic there. I think that that's probably supposed to be the place of the crucifixion, judging. No, it should be over there. No, that would be over there. We can sort of see it on the other side. There's a rock quarry just outside the gates or the walls of the city. So the place of the crucifixion and today's basilica would be over there in that corner, as it were.
Father, can you orient this?
That's south, this is north, that's east, that's west. The Mount of Olives is where those people are standing there.
They actually have oriented this to true north and...
Indeed it is, yes.
I'm not sure. Father, where were the pools again?
to know where the pools are.
These are the pools.
But they have two pools. There were not two pools, there were 5 pools.
Oh, enclosed with the red tile roof.
This is imagined how it might have looked.
Yeah.
But
That's the area where
I thought we were talking
the general
about
idea
open...
is, well, yes, it's just the water would pour in, and there were pipes which would take the water out into the temple.
water tanks.
To orient you some more, basically when we entered the city, before we started to walk on Via Dolorosa, we entered somewhere from here, from about this way. So when the Garden of Gethsemane is a little bit behind, so we entered,
Past the sheep pool.
through somewhere over here.
Yes, there's
A little gate by the tower, but then
be that as it may, that little gate, that's supposed to be the sheep gate. We do have a reference in the New Testament to the sheep gate, and then the sheep poles. And another factor is that I would not build the Antonia Fortress this close to the front. I would put it at the back. The question is, where is the moat? The Franciscans have always insisted that the Antonia Fortress was on their side of the moat. But that would be against the Praetorian. If the Praetorian is the Antonia Fortress, then this whole building, the Antonia Fortress, would have to begin where in fact it ends. That's one factor. The second factor, it would not be so tall, so large. As I would say it, the trial of Jesus would simply be on the level of the city, where the city has risen up. So that in the framework of this, the roof would be level with the city, but behind the building as opposed to in front of the building. Because the ground at that point very radically, much more radically, again, there's controversy in the model, the ground actually much more radically drops into the depth of this street.
we probably can safely say that at least one of the towers were raised above the temple yard, and there was a dispatch of Roman soldiers always on guard if Jews would start rioting, and we have started their own festivities, so they will be overlooking to make sure that riot is not breaking out, and so to be able to put it down quickly.